Good morning, everybody. I'm Matt Helmer. I'm the Managing Director of the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute. Just a few quick notes. One, if you have questions or need anything, you can find people with a blue lanyard. Those are Aspen and Rutgers staff, and they can help you with anything you need. Two, there is Wi-Fi available at the Senate guest link. The password is 118 lowercase Congress. I had a bunch of really inspirational and funny stuff I was going to say today, in my head at least, but part of my job here is to kind of keep things moving and make sure we're on time. So I want to invite our next panel to come up and start taking their seats, our first panel here. But I also do want to welcome you to the Capitol. You know, this is a special place to be having this event. I think on its best days, the Capitol shows that we can unite for a common purpose, a shared vision, and luckily, we see that a lot in employee ownership, right? We see people coming together to unite around a common vision for where they want to take their company, a common agenda for how they take care of one another. And as we're going to hear a lot about today, it's often more than that. It's about taking care of their community and making sure that they live in thriving communities and places. So there's been a lot of progress at the federal level on employee ownership over the past 5 or 6 years, as you all know. A lot of legislation introduced, a good number of it passed. But there's also been just a tremendous amount of activity at the state level. And I think that's really important and great because oftentimes when we think about the federal government and its role and Congress's role, sometimes there are things they can't do. Sometimes there are things that they aren't well positioned to do. And sometimes there are things that maybe they need inspired to do, right? And that's why we have these great laboratories of democracy to provide that inspiration. So let's dive into some of that. And I'm going to introduce our first panel on state innovation in employee ownership policy. I'm going to start right here on my left with Kerry Siggins. Kerry's the CEO of StoneAge, the chair of the Colorado Employee Ownership Commission, and if you're looking for your next great read, she recently released a book called The Ownership Mindset, a handbook for transforming your life and leadership. To the left of Kerry is State Senator Mike Padden from my home state, the most beautiful state, at least in the lower 48 of Washington. To the left of Senator Padden is Congresswoman Naquetta Ricks. She's a state representative of District 40 from the Colorado House of Representatives. To Congresswoman Ricks' left is Paul Kinghorn. He's the director of the Center for Business Growth and Innovation in Advanced Iowa out of the University of Northern Iowa. And moderating today's conversation is Zach Warmbrodt, the financial services editor at Politico. We had Zach last year kick off the forum. He did a pretty decent job, so we thought we'd have him back to give it another try. I'm just kidding. It's great to have Zach back. He did an excellent job last year, and he was at the top of our mind when we thought about this year's forum as well. So, Zach, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me back. Just a quick introduction on what I do. I write our daily Morning Money newsletter, which really tries to capture kind of the policy and political back and forth over financial policy. It's kind of like the nexus of Wall Street meets Washington in the business community. And so you can imagine at the federal level, there's a lot of friction over that. But I think what's really interesting about this topic is there's clearly bipartisan interest in employee stock ownership. And as everything's happening at the federal level with the election, it's a great time to kind of look at what the states are getting done. So before we kind of dive into the weeds of the policy, Kerry, could you talk a little bit about yourself and your company and your employee stock ownership journey?
So I'm going to stand because I can see everybody kind of trying to look over people's heads. So I hope you don't mind. Does that make it easier for people in the back? Okay, perfect. All right, so Kerry Siggins, CEO of StoneAge. StoneAge is a small manufacturing company based in Durango, Colorado. We make industrial cleaning equipment, think high-tech squirt guns on steroids. So our tools and robots are used to clean industrial manufacturing facilities like refineries, petrochem plants, food processing plants, anything that's really dirty that needs to be cleaned. So everything that you use on a daily basis, the gas in your car, the rubber in your tires, the plastic in your water bottle, that all comes from an industrial manufacturing facility that has to be cleaned. And our products are the ones that clean it. We're the leader in what we do. And we've been employee-owned since the 90s. Our founders created a skin in the game stock ownership plan where employees could invest in the company and get a quarterly dividend. And it was a really successful program. And then in 2014, I really pushed them to consider who actually owns this company. You two are in your 60s, and when something happens to you, is it going to be the machinist who has been here for 20 years, who has bought a lot of stock and is the majority owner, who loves the feeling of ownership but doesn't really want the responsibility of being the owner? And it forced us to look at a more sustainable model. And because we believe in broad ownership and selling to a strategic buyer or private equity was not on the table, I get probably 15 calls a week from private equity looking to buy StoneAge. We're really committed to being in Colorado, which, sorry, Matt, Colorado's the best state in the lower 48. We are really committed to staying in our community. And because we serve heavy industry, anybody else wouldn't keep us there. They would move us off to Houston, Texas. And not that there's anything wrong with Houston, Texas, but part of what makes StoneAge amazing is that we're in Durango. It's this beautiful place that just fosters creativity and well-being, and we didn't want to leave. So we formed an ESOP in 2015, partial ESOP. We became 100% ESOP in 2022 when we bought out the rest of our founder shares, plus all of our non-founder, non-ESOP shareholders, and we're really proud of that. Now, our goal is to create 1,000 millionaires through our employee ownership program, and we're well on our way to doing that. The ESOP, just in the first 8 years of existence, has already provided $15 million worth of wealth to participants. We've paid out over $3 million for departing employee owners, and in 5 years, we expect that to be about $30 million in wealth. And we're a small company. We have 200 employees. We do about $80 million. We'll do about $80 million in revenue this year. We're not some big company, but that is a tremendous amount of wealth that we are creating for every single person, every individual in our company. So that's a little bit about StoneAge. I'm also the commissioner for the Colorado Employee the Commission for Employee Ownership, and we'll talk a little bit about that later.
Great,
Thank
thanks.
you.
That was a really good illustration of what we're going to be talking about here. Senator Padden and Representative Ricks, you're showing that there's bipartisan support for these ideas. Representative Ricks, could you talk a little bit about yourself and how you came to this topic?
Okay, yeah, so I'm State Representative Naquetta Ricks, and I've been serving in the Colorado State Legislature for 40 years. For 4 years. I serve on the Employee Ownership Commission, which is something that was started by our Governor Jared Polis in 2019. My interest in this is I also am the founder and the president of the African Chamber of Commerce, but it's all about creating wealth for employees, for people, creating opportunity, better benefits, loyalty. So there's a lot of good things that can happen when employees feel like they are part of a company, that they're owners, they are motivated, they are more competitive. So there's so many different benefits. And wherever there's economic opportunity, I'm there. So that's why I'm interested in this topic.
Thank you. Senator Padden?
Yes, I'm State Senator Mike Padden. I represent the 4th Legislative District, which is Spokane Valley, right up against the Idaho border. And very pleased to be here today. Certainly want to thank Rutgers and the Aspen Institute for organizing this. And the more I've gotten into it, the more I've become a proponent of ESOPs and employee ownership. I really think it is transformative what it can do to our society. The more ESOPs that we have, the more opportunities. I mean, so many businesses don't even know what an ESOP is or that they have an opportunity. Or especially where you have family-run businesses and the next generation doesn't want to continue the business. I mean, this is such a wonderful opportunity. So we had, and thanks to Colorado, too, for kind of leading the way for us. So I sponsored Senate Bill 5096 with, I don't know how to put this, but maybe the 2 most liberal members of the Senate and the 2 most conservatives members of the Senate. And the bill, amazingly, passed unanimously in all 4 committees it was in and off the floor of the House and Senate. So that's been great. People have different reasons for supporting ESOPs. A lot of my friends on the other side of the aisle like the ideas of workers being in control. We had one that was an organizer and negotiator for union, was one of the sponsors. And some of us on the other side like some of the other benefits, what the research has shown. And in the bill itself, we mention Rutgers University and the research they did on how these ESOPs outperformed other companies during the pandemic. But also the impact on the individuals is so fantastic. I'm familiar, and one of our key sponsors or supporters of the legislation was Schweitzer Engineering out of Pullman, Washington, and they've been a 100% ESOP since 2009. And you look at the number of people that have retired as millionaires, but you look at the family life of the people that work there. And I mean, on campus, they have daycare, they have all health care you can get right on campus, doctors and nurses. Anyway, it's a tremendous story. I want to also thank very much Jack Moriarty, who kind of honchoed this. I didn't really know till today his connection with Rutgers. I thought he was with Employment Ownership America, now the Lafayette Institute. But we had support from all sorts of different groups, the Greater Seattle Business Association, U.S. Federation of Workers Cooperatives, some unions, co-ops, and the United Transportation Union, the Catholic Conference, and so they're able to build a consensus. And now the bill actually passed in 2023 and has taken effect. Part of it, the most important part, will take effect July 1st, which will be the tax credits for those companies that are trying to transition to ESOPs. And there's been approximately $2 million allocated, so you could get up to half of your transition costs. If it's a co-op or a trust, that's $25,000. If it's an ESOP, it's $100,000. And they've hired a full-time employee in the State Department of Commerce, Lorena Lowell, and we're just about ready to get our commission finalized, like you have in Colorado. So all that is moving forward, and one of the things we want to work on is a revolving loan program. In our state, there's a constitutional prohibition against loaning funds, so we are looking to a couple people, including my Congresswoman, Kathy McMorris Rogers, who chairs the Energy and Commerce Committee here, on perhaps having a program where through the federal government there could be a revolving loan program that would help. Again, we have about 93. I think it's growing all the time. People call me, they hear the bill, and got a call from an organic landscaping company up in Redmond, Washington. They only have 55 employees, which I always thought was a little on the low side to get started, but they got started and ESOP. And what I found out is folks that do this, they want to promote it. They're kind of like the pastor at church, you know, they're evangelizing all the time. And so that's been very exciting. Well, I could go on, but we've got a lot of people here to speak, and be happy to participate further in the panel.
Thank you. Definitely come back on what's happening in Washington. But first, I wanted to go to Iowa. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me and letting us share our story. So I direct a center that's specifically geared towards supporting small to medium businesses. We use a pretty loose definition of small, medium businesses. We talk about companies in around 20 employees up to 200 plus employees. As a public institution, we're keenly aware that there are resources that we have at our disposal that we can bring to bear, and we should, as a public entity, do that. But we also recognize that the private sector plays a vital role, and we're not trying to compete with or take away from, but rather enhance what they do. And so our mission and purpose is to work collaboratively with the private sector, with the economic development entities, the legislative bodies, to try and help and support these small businesses. So I come to the program wearing multiple hats. I've been a small business owner. I've managed several firms. So I know what it's like to be in the trenches, what I like to refer to as the operational vortex, where you're getting hit every day from multiple directions. And in spite of the fact that you might have had a list the night before what you're going to tackle as soon as you came in, that list almost never is what you end up doing, because you're responding and reacting. And a lot of people take great pride and satisfaction in doing that. However, the reality that we know is that those that are always in firefighter mode rarely are the most productive businesses. And so a lot of what we do is try to work with these owners to think more strategically about their business. About 10 years ago, back up a little bit, about 12, 13 years ago, our state legislature wanted to be proactive with regard to some of the resources that they made available to the ESOP community. And so they passed some legislation specifically earmarking dollars to help support that. And I can talk about that a little bit more in detail. My center wasn't focused on that. We were focused on ownership transition. We knew that the silver tsunami was coming. We knew that there was a problem because the vast majority of these business owners had not properly prepared for that transition, and they were leaving their companies, their employees, and especially their communities at risk when they put it off till the end. And so we tell people the role that we serve predominantly has to do with supporting the economy. In doing that, we want to make sure that everybody's boat gets lifted, hence why the idea of employee ownership, empowering employees and their communities, keeping those jobs in their community, like Durango. Just happened to pass through Durango this past summer. What a beautiful place up in the mountains there it is. But that's our focus, is to keep them there and keep these economies vibrant to the extent that they can, and then to grow them.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to dig into the policy that's taking shape in your states and how you got there. So I want to stay with you, Paul. You referenced some of the legislation that was passed, I think, about a decade ago. But could you give us an overview of Iowa's evolution and journey on this? What's the narrative? What's the arc?
Sure. So we had a governor, then Governor Branston, who was proactive in thinking about how employee ownership might benefit the states, and particularly the employees, in building wealth. Then we had a legislature that was interested in how the state might take a leadership role in that respect. It wasn't a slam dunk. It took some discussion, debate back and forth, but eventually, in kind of a nonpartisan way, they came together and they passed legislation that had a tax benefit, so waived the state capital gains tax, and then also set aside a fund of dollars, $50,000 total to $25,000 tranches up to. Anybody who is looking at the feasibility of converting to an ESOP would get a $25,000 offset to that cost, and then those that actually went through the process would get another $25,000. Here's the interesting fact that we found out. Prior to that legislation getting passed, there was about 12 or 15 ESOPs a year that were converting to, or companies that were converting to an ESOP. After the legislation passed, there was about 12 to 15 companies a year converting to ESOP legislation. And that's where my center got involved, working with our State Economic Development Authority, the governor's office, and others. How can we actually move this in a way that's productive and helps with the intent, what they're trying to pass?
Thank you. And Senator Padden, I wanted to go back to you, and you touched on this a little bit, but could you kind of tell us how one of the most comprehensive laws on employee ownership came together recently? I mean, who prompted this? How did you negotiate it? And can you tell us a little bit more about everything it would do?
Yeah, it was very unique, and I've been in the Senate since 2011, so I've never kind of had a bill that all of a sudden all these people come to me supporting the bill, you know. But so it had a momentum of its own. Actually, a constituent of mine by the name of Gillard Tournay had taken a 400-person mortgage company to an ESOP. He'd recently moved to the Spokane area from Western Washington, and he was very excited about it. So he came to me and then got in touch with Mr. Moriarty and talked to the other sponsors. The majority leader in the Senate, Senator Peterson, was a very accomplished attorney. He even went to Yale, you know, so. But he had actually converted a business into an ESOP. He was very supportive. Senator Hasagawa was the union organizer and a great guy, but really far to the left in our Senate. And myself and Senator Schessler, who represents the area that Schweitzer Engineering is headquartered. So we were the four. But then, like I said, these other groups, the Seattle Business Association, which is, has a unique role in Seattle. These co-ops from all over the state, and it just kind of grew. And we had the hearings, which were all very very positive. There were a few little changes on who was going to be on the commission, but it went through. We were a little concerned just with the flow of legislation. You can have a great idea, and they never quite get to it right at the end. So we did, or I should say, Ownership America did, at the end, hire a contract lobbyist who did a great job getting it over the finish line. But the benefits, I think, sold itself to some degree. And that was kind of how it all came together. We had chambers, and then we had the main business organization of the state found out about it. Association of Washington Business, they supported it, and it got to the point where we just really didn't have any opposition.
So were there any challenges? I mean, is there any major challenges you would flag if other policymakers are looking at this, political or policy-wise?
Yeah, I think a great job was done kind of before the session started with the state agencies too. I mean, obviously you need the state agencies are going to make a recommendation to the governor to sign the bill or not, or veto parts of it. So we worked with the Department of Commerce. They've worked with the financial institutions, and like I say, we're just about ready for the blast off, and then the different businesses that were co-ops or employee ownerships would come. Everybody had a story, and how that business model, how it worked, how it was so beneficial for the workers, for the company, how the money was going to stay local, not going to be bought out and moved, like you said, to Texas from Colorado. So all those things kind of came together, and it was, just a real pleasure to have a bill like that. The whole system really is designed more to kill bills than to pass them.
And I guess just briefly, I mean, what are kind of the bullet points so people know exactly what it would do? I mean, any highlights you want to flag for people?
Yeah, I think number one, that the workers were going to be better off financially. Not only while they were working there, but also in retirement. And Schweitzer was probably the prime example. They have 6,500 employees, engineers, and a lot of other people that work in the manufacturing part of the company. So they were going to be better off. People like the idea of the money, the companies staying local. They like the idea of building generational wealth, of also, there are just so many positive things about the model, and people realize that a lot of people didn't know about it. So our Department of Commerce will be a clearinghouse. They can offer technical advice, legal, or refer people to where they can get that and learn how to move forward. So all those things were positive. But I mean, basically, it just they thought the lives of our constituents were going to be better.
Thank you. And so Representative Ricks, I mean, Colorado has been a pioneer in this area and passed a few laws. So could you walk us through those and the impact they've had?
Absolutely. Colorado is a trailblazer in this space. And in 2019, our Governor Jared Polis, started with a commission to explore the possibilities of employee ownership and pursue employee-owned business structures. In 2020, he commissioned an office, and then in 2021, we did a $50 million program, which was a tax credit to help for people who were converting into employee ownership businesses. And this is open for 5 years. It gives, up to 20%, at least 20% ownership conversion to access the tax credit. And the awards are up to $150,000 for an employee stock ownership plan. The governor then also has an appointed commission in partnership with the governor's office, and it works with our Office of Economic Development and International Trade. In 2023, there was more legislation which expanded the eligibility of how you qualified. So we increased the cap from $100,000 at that time to $150,000 for employee stock ownership. And then for applications that came due January 21st, January 1st of this year, it expands the tax credit to include 50% of the cost of a qualified employee-owned business, expanding its employee ownership by at least 20% and not to exceed $25,000. Then in 2024, this year, there's a new bill that codifies the office and makes it permanent. It also institutes a new tax credit which will help with keeping up. So there's a lot of record keeping that comes with employee stock ownership companies. And so you have to do these reporting, and the companies now can apply for this credit to offset the costs from their bookkeeping and all the record keeping that has to be done with the feds. One of the biggest things with employee stock ownership is capital. How do these employees find the money to purchase and buy out an owner? And so that is being done in Colorado through our collateral business office. There's some treasury money that is out there, and the treasury, I guess, serves as a collateral for the loan that these employees take. And so that is how we're doing some of that work in Colorado.
Thank you. That was a really helpful breakdown. And I guess, along the way, after all those steps, what kind of impacts has Colorado seen from all those policies?
So there's over 200 employee-owned companies now in Colorado. Since the inception of the commission and the employee ownership office, we have over 63 conversions that have happened. Most of them are in our rural areas. We've had some really great stories, and where people who didn't think about this structure before are now looking for the opportunity to offer it to their employees. So I'll talk about some of the great stories. One of them is Bojo Pizza. I don't know if anybody has eaten Bojo Pizza. It's a mounting kind of cult thing, but it's a great story. No, but it's great. Beautiful pizza with lots of stuffings and great cheese. Anyhow, but you have to try it if you're in Colorado. But Bojo's has been around for over 50 years. And so the owner was looking to sell, finally, and he has been he's held down the whole town in many, many down times and up times. And so the idea that he is now selling to and converting into an employee stock owner plan is amazing because they're retaining employees. Employees are very, very happy to be considered owners, and it's created a lot of loyalty, and the town is thrilled. Bojo has expanded not only in Idaho Springs, but they're in several different Colorado towns, in 5 or 6 different towns. So that is a big deal for them to stay and still have that Colorado tradition, but then also create the wealth for the employees that have helped to grow this company over the 50 years.
Thanks. Kerry, just to stick with Colorado, and Representative Ricks touched on this a little bit. So after a company goes through the transition, there's obviously various responsibilities. Can you talk about like what happens next after you make the move and what policies should be in people's heads on that front?
Absolutely. So I'm going to stand up again so you can all hear. So a lot of focus is put on getting companies over the line, which is really important. It's very complex, especially for ESOPs, less so with co-ops and employee-owned trusts. But then a lot of companies are, what do I do with this next? And to get the true power and benefit of employee ownership, you really have to work on teaching people how to think and act like owners. And let's face it, most of us don't know how to do that. We are taught, keep your head down, get your work done, don't speak up. Your job could be at risk. So ownership thinking is not something that is prevalent in most of corporate America. And so something that I think is really important that we look at, both at a policy level and supporting employee ownership and how we fund it, and in supporting the companies who've made that conversion, it's what do you do next? And that's something that we're really proud of that we've done in Colorado. We've created 2 peer networking groups. One for executives of ESOP companies, and then we have a group for co-ops as well. And then the same thing for the company's communications committees. So individual contributors or managers who are responsible for educating the employees about employee ownership, about their employee ownership plan, and getting people excited about it and really bought into it. And I think this is really important because a lot of companies don't know what to do. Founders haven't ever had to share the wealth with anybody and haven't had to encourage people to think and act like owners. So the support that we're providing at the state level for that experience share, this is how we're doing it. Here's some cultural things you need to think about, some educational things that you can think about, both at the executive level and at the communications committee, that individual contributor level is really, really powerful because you want your employees to think and act like owners, to take responsibility for taking care of your customers and growing the value in the company. It matters to them. It's their bottom line too. But unless you teach people and you support that, it's very difficult to get that type of thinking within your organization. So we started these 2 groups, both within ESOP community and then the co-op community, and it's been really, really positive. I run our executive peer networking group, and we have anywhere from 10 to 50 people every single quarter coming together to share ideas and to talk about what they're doing, and I think that's really powerful. The communications committee group, they sometimes have 100 people because it's teams that are coming in and who are really trying to figure out how do we make this employee ownership plan meaningful to our employees, not just from a wealth creation standpoint, but from I have purpose and meaning in my work because I get to share in the success of the company. And that creates happier employees, which create happier companies, which create happier families, happier communities. It really does have a big ripple effect. So those are some of the things that we're doing to support after the transaction.
And one thing that Representative Ricks flagged is the credit for record keeping.
Yeah.
I mean, how impactful could that be? I mean, how big of a cost is that for businesses once they?
So ongoing. To set up an ESOP, it's about between $300,000 and $500,000. I think there's some people trying to do it for less, but I say you pay for what you get, and you do not want to mess up your ESOP. It can be. I know because we did. And it's painful to undo some of these things. So it's a significant upfront cost. We actually did it twice because we did a partial ESOP and then 100%. So we spent a lot of money to make this happen. But then there's the ongoing cost. So that alone can be a turnoff for people. And that's why we put these tax credits in place, not just for ESOP companies, but for any employee-owned model. Is to help make that easier to access. But then there's ongoing costs that are probably anywhere between $25,000 and $100,000 a year, depending on your plan and how many changes you're making. And you have to have somebody administer your plan so that they're making sure that the stock is distributed to employees accurately. And so this new bill that hopefully gets passed here in the next few weeks, I think, a few months at the very least, will help. So it will help businesses with those ongoing costs every single year. Now, I think it's only up to ESOPs or employee-owned companies 7 years and younger. So like my company wouldn't be able to benefit from it, but that's okay, we've got it down. But that is a big incentive. So you can get the tax credit on the front end, and then you can get some of your ongoing costs credited back to you, whether it's part of a tax break, or if you're a sub-S corporation and you don't pay, the ESOP doesn't pay taxes, that goes back to you as basically a rebate. And that's really, really powerful. That can help some people who are saying, I don't know if I can afford this, nudge them over the line. So,
Thank you.
yep.
And Paul, how should we think about policy to support, the range of employee ownership models? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm glad that Kerry brought up co-ops and employee ownership trusts. When we first went into helping and supporting business ownership and the ESOP, we realized that not every company out there would be a good candidate, right? That financially, the owners looking to get out of it, a number of factors wasn't favorable. So we thought co-ops would bump right up next to it. Not big enough, then look at a co-op. What we've come to discover is it doesn't look like adjacent right next to it, but it looks more like a barbell, that there's this in-between space where traditional ownership transition lives and is very healthy. And it's hard to incent an owner to go into an employee ownership route unless a couple of things are prevalent. First one is they have a strong desire to protect their legacy, right? If they want to keep it, and then by extension, the belief is that employees are more likely to keep the operation similar to what it was before. Care about their communities, so they don't want to move it out of the community, and so that does a good job of helping to anchor it. And then additionally, that kind of gets overlaid, and sometimes nothing you can do about it. There's not a known good third party, buyer that's out there, so they're kind of stuck. They don't have a good buyer. Had a hard time trying to sell the community, particularly in rural areas, why someone should want to come there. So we found that the co-op model is an attractive model. Now I got to be careful how I say this because these are very esteemed panelists, but I'm not sure that the incentive that the current owners need is necessarily solely comes down to either an offset like what we've done in our state to help offset the cost, or I think a tax credit is certainly a better way to go with it. Here's my point. The fact is, not a one of us, I doubt, would stop and bend over and pick up $25,000 if it was given to us, right? But that by itself is not really what's driving these people for their consideration. We're not doing the feasibility for them. They get out scot-free. They have to contribute 50% towards that cost. We're not doing the conversion for them. They have to contribute towards that cost. We're only paying up to $25,000. So they're going to either do it or not do it based on that. What they need more from organizations like ours and others out there, they need an advocate, somebody who can be that Pied Piper that's going around sharing, educating, helping them to understand what employee ownership is. We see it all the time. I'm sure the rest of you to some degree have seen this. The concept that we're all going to hold hands, sing Kumbaya, everybody gets a vote, the shipping clerk gets to tell the CEO what to do, when to do it, and all that stuff. That's not how it works. Well, you could do it that way if you wanted to, but I'll tell you that that's not a good way to do it. So we educate them on what structure looks like. We demystify some of these things and these notions. And so part of it is helping them to see what the possibility is, and then working with them as they conceive of. Because the problem that's out there right now, especially in the co-op world, is when they ask, what does it look like? The answer always comes back, depends. Because it really depends on what they want to do based on their needs, the passions of the owner, the employees, what have you. The second piece that is super critical, the first one is advocating, getting the word out for these resources. Second one is there is an educational component. The senior leadership who are now taking over an employee-owned operation might be really good at business, but they don't necessarily know employee ownership from that perspective. And so whether it's peer groups that are out there, whether it's other training. Now, keep in mind, these are very professional, can be very professional individuals that don't want to be seen as being dummies when it comes to this. So you've got to do it in a way that leverages their knowledge, they're learning from each other. So peer groups are an excellent way to do that. And then secondarily, the employees have to learn what it's like to be an employee owner. We heard that before. And it's not just get together in a group and let's have these trust building exercises. I mean, it can be that, but it's got to be more than that, right? What programs are these companies putting in place so that the employees rise to the top and are willing to take on that new mantle? You know, we're working with one firm that has a group that is their employee representative. I can't remember, they have a term that they use for it, but they know that they're not getting the penetration within their firm that they need to. And so what we've done is we're building a program around those individuals to go back into their respective departments, into their respective teams, and then take leadership and then bring others forward. So it's not just the top-down approach from the senior management, but it's got to come from the ground as well. And everybody's got to understand the benefit of employee ownership. If you hold out, especially in an ESOP, that it's this future retirement plan, for many people that's too far in the future. They cannot connect to that. I mean, don't get me wrong, no one's going to turn away, you know, that when it get to that time, but that's not what's driving them. So we've got to get it down to the grassroots, down to the fundamentals, and get these people engaged, and then do programs that help support as we work around that. And then again, when I say the funding isn't just giving people money away, it does have to connect to how do they go about financing these conversions, right? Because somebody has to pay for it. The owner is going to probably take a little bit of the paper back to make the deal work, but there's still going to be a gap. And so we've got to have funding out there that can support that transition and de-risk it for the lenders.
Yeah, now, and Paul, I want to stick with you, and maybe on that last note, what is the role for private sector investors or philanthropy to support employee ownership? Anything you want to flag there?
So without getting too in the weeds here, for some time I've struggled with the concept of access to capital, especially at the marginalized communities. And when we talk about the co-op population, especially in rural communities, it's often very difficult to get the funding necessary. They don't have the skill, they don't have the, often the collateral, capital that's needed to launch it. So as I went down that pathway, looking at how do we get better access to capital, I first and foremost dismissed the equity market because it's their money. They're going to do whatever they want with it. We, in the private sector or public sector, cannot force them to do something with their money. We can incent them, but we can't force them. So that's not really a good place to focus on. The second place I looked was traditional lending. And I'd met with our local representative of the Small Business Administration. I was talking him through this model and about how there's a default rate that's pretty high, and how do we de-risk that and help improve it. And he looked at me and said, "Paul, you're missing something fundamental." I thought this through. He said, "Not a single lender out there is writing a loan that they think is going to not pay back. If they thought that they weren't going to get paid back on it, they wouldn't write it. They wouldn't go through with it, right? So right from the get-go, every single deal that goes across their table, they're convinced is going to make them money. Turns out that that's not the case, right? And so they're not going to change their risk profiles. They've got shareholders, they've got regulators in the government. They're going to be hesitant. The one group that we can touch, the one group of people in that whole equation that we can help out, are the business owners and their employees. We can teach them what financial literacy is and how to be responsible with their financial statements in the operation. We can teach them the skills that's necessary to be strategic thinking and differentiate themselves in the market and all those things that make any company, regardless employee ownership, a better sound operation and the leaders that are leading it. And now armed with evidence that their operations are performing, that they've got the skills, then the capital flows to them.
Thank you, Paul. So I think we've entered our takeaways and forward-looking section of the discussion. So I wanted to go back to Colorado and throw this question out to Kerry and Representative Ricks. And maybe I'll start with you, Kerry. What do you think other states can take away with what's worked or what hasn't worked in Colorado? And is there anything more Colorado should do policy-wise?
Yes, I think that following our journey is a really good one. I think lots of states are doing it and it's proven effective. Creating the commission, having that support from our governor is huge. Governor Polis has sold 2 of his businesses to his employees, so he really understands it. And that has allowed the commission, I think, to do some pretty creative things. We don't have much of a budget, but I'm trying to change that. Trying to get us a little bit of money to do more events and more education. But having this commission where we have such a broad range of people involved in the employee ownership community across Colorado has been really powerful. We've been able to partner with our state agencies to develop these bills along with the governor's office, and with having businesses on the commission as well as policymakers, attorneys who know what they're doing. Jason, I see you over there. And people who are really passionate about it has made it very successful. So having that commission, I think, is something that states can do. And then I highly recommend the peer networking groups. It's hard. You have to have a person who leads it. I'm in an organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and I get so much out of it. And I wanted to recreate that model that they do to do experience share within the state. And so you have to have some structure and someone who's passionate around creating that. But it really has moved the needle. We've had some amazing events that have really solidified Colorado as the leader in what we do, not just from a policy standpoint, but also from a how are we supporting businesses afterwards. So I think creating that, looking at that legislation that you can pass, like if we get this passed where we can support ongoing costs for employee ownership programs, that's going to be huge. Looking at doing things like that within your states. So it's not just about the conversion, but it's about what do you do after, and creating that commission or some sort of group where you have multiple stakeholders who are bringing their expertise and their passion to the table. I think it's what's really separated us from everyone else.
And Representative Ricks, any takeaways for other states, or what do you want to do next?
Sure. I would also say that this is a great bipartisan type initiative. People can agree on both sides that business and the benefit of employee ownership is something that we want to push. In Colorado, it's been a bipartisan thing. The House Bill in 2023 was, 2024 isn't carried by bipartisan, but it's had support on both sides of the House. I would also say that 60% of our applications come out of the rural areas. So for places that are like small towns and the rural areas is a great thing, and also anywhere because you're creating wealth. Kerry mentioned the peer networking groups. That is a working group that looks at collaboration, sharing best practices, offering solutions, and looking for solutions for challenges. So that's something as well. And the funding. Colorado right now is looking at the U.S. Treasury funds through the SSBCI, which is the State Small Credit Business Commission. And so we're just testing that out. It's going to be activated through our cash collateral support program. And we're looking to see if this could be maybe that piece of funding, because like it's been said up here, most of this work starts with the owner carrying a note. for part of it, but then you also have to find some money to buy him out as well. And this is a way of collateralizing through the U.S. Treasury funds and federal. If there's more federal funding that could be done, that's something I will push out here for these types of activities that would really also help to push this initiative further.
Thank you. So similar question for you, Paul. If you were counseling other policymakers in other states, I mean, what's worked in Iowa, what hasn't? What do you think Iowa should do next?
Sure. So it turns out there's a little over 20 employee ownership centers of some kind across the country in each of the states, in 20 of the states, 21 of the states or something to that effect. I know we were the 21st one to actually formally say we were going to be a center, even though we'd been acting like one for quite some time before that. With the exception of a handful of us, the vast majority of them are single-person operations. Some of them are even like part-time, half-time type roles. And if you want to make a splash, you cannot just put a toe in the water and then hope and pray that that's good. So there needs to be a concerted effort across the board in the states to find a partner who has the connection and the reach within their state. It's already involved in some degree doing that, and working with that audience, the types of small businesses. And then you've got to fund them. You got to give them the resource. We're not talking about pour tons and tons of money, but there's got to be enough there that can support the staffing, can support the marketing efforts, can support the events and networking that's required to make this thing a reality. I know that there's some consideration here at the federal level in the Works Act that's got people pretty excited about it. Don't want to get into the politics of where it is and why it's where it is, but things like that can really be helpful to kind of kickstart it. And then what we are finding, much the same way that the ESOP community is very passionate and promoting the word out themselves, amongst centers, we need to be sharing resources, and that's why we think organizations like Rutgers does a wonderful job sharing their resources with the community, as do other states. Colorado certainly has taken a lead as well. And so being there to answer questions, guide, leverage one another so that it's not a heavy lift on any one person or one organization, but collectively made easier for everybody. So getting the word out. I told you at the beginning that we had this fundamental funding that was set aside to help change the number of ESOPs, and it didn't. And the one thing that they missed and didn't take into account is they didn't put the funding behind any program to get the word out and to support the businesses. And in the absence of that, just dollars or tax credits on a page aren't sufficient to make the kind of impact that we're hoping to make.
Well, thank you. That was really helpful. And then, and Senator Padden, so you've taken this really huge step in Washington State, and I want to ask you, what should federal policymakers be doing or learning from what you've recently done?
Well, we would be very happy if we could get a revolving loan program started, and like I said, that's something we're working on to be supportive. But also, I mean, forums like this, we had a forum with our Spokane Valley Chamber of Commerce where we had a couple of ESOP CEOs speak and let other folks know about it, and especially now that we have part of the infrastructure. But if I think if we can get the revolving loan on the federal side, that's kind of one other piece of the puzzle that'll greatly increase the number of ESOPs in our state. And if I might just make one comment what Paul had earlier on employee education. One of the CEOs of a grocery chain, he would go to the various stores. I think they have 17 stores. And he said some of the senior management would be a little upset with him because he would be talking to all the employees. And he said, well, that's my constituency. Those are the people that keep me in my position, So that was good. And then on I was shopping once at Winco, which is an ESOP, and going through the line, and the checker, I asked her, I said, hey, how do you like being an owner? And she said, well, I don't know. It's only been a year or so. I think it's going to work out. And the person right behind me said, oh, if you're the owner, can you take tomorrow off? You know, but of course it doesn't work that way. But the education is there, and it's such a tremendous model. I'm very excited that I think it's going to grow and grow, not only in our state, but across the country.
And I guess I'll throw the same question out to the rest of the panel, Kerry, Representative Ricks, Paul. Anything else that you would like to see happening at a federal level that could support this?
So I want to give a shout out to the Employee Ownership Exchange Network and Steve Stork and the work he's doing and others like that. So having a strong association at that level that kind of brings people together. I know that that's not public sector, but that's essential to getting the word out. And then again, so that not everybody has to start at ground zero. There's resources. We don't have to have everybody creating their own videos on what employee ownership is and what co-ops are. And through that network, we're able to tap into white papers, videos, other content. And now Kerry is known to me. We might invite her to be on a webinar with some of our guests that can hear the stories firsthand from people like that are passionate. They lived it. And if somebody has a question about what to do or what to avoid, that's where you get the best answers, right? And the other thing too, and I'm not sure how we do this at a federal level, but we've got to get the professional service providers, the accountants, the attorneys, consultants, wealth advisors, the people that are in a position to influence the business owners when they're thinking about that transition, to understand what ownership, employee ownership is. Elsewise, it's too easy for them, and too often they take the easy route out, which is, you don't want to do that. It's too complicated, it doesn't meet your needs, and dismiss it. And they do it in great part because they don't understand it. And if they were to pursue it, they'd have to explain to their client that that's not an area of expertise for them. So somehow we've got to get them up to speed, understanding that so that it's not just a public sector pushing it, but everybody is trying to get that tide to rise.
So there's kind of a whole ecosystem education issue. So on that note, I think we're ready to open it up for questions from the audience.
I have a question about the state of Washington, but first I wanted to share first in Illinois, in Chicago, they started an initiative called Manufacturing Renaissance. And it's exactly what you were talking about, to try and provide all that support services for a business, to these small businesses to be able to perform better, and then so on. A question about incentives that you've been asking, thank you, would be tax incentives, and specifically to the state of Washington, because we have some clients there. There was a new tax that was going in place, sort of a luxury tax of an extra 7% on capital gains. So to what extent, when you're looking at this, is sort of the tax a motivator, or being able to avoid taxes to the selling shareholder important in their decision?
Yeah, in our state, the way it's going to work is it's a B&O tax, so it's on gross. So they get a credit against the B&O tax that they pay, so they have a reduction in that tax. It really won't have anything to do with the capital gains, which, by the way, that's going to be voted on this fall. There's an initiative that got the signatures, so we'll see if that stays there or not. But B&O tax, which of course you pay whether you're making any money or not on just your volume. So that was what was chosen to give the tax credit.
I can just also, I think in this, I mean, it's a mechanism to be able to help offset that. So for me, I didn't get to participate in this because we became an ESOP after the legislation was passed. But to me, it's more of a mechanism to be able to help offset the cost. So I know everybody looks at taxes differently. The way that I would have looked at it as, okay, this helps de-risk it rather than it being a motivator to pay less taxes. It's really, okay, good, this is how I can help fund this ESOP. So personally, when I talk about the legislation that we've passed in Colorado, that's what I talk about it as. It's not a reduction in taxes, it's a way for you to help fund setting up your ESOP.
Hi, I'm Corey Rosen, and I'm with the National Center for Employee Ownership. Thank you for the work you're doing. And there's a lot of people in this audience who I hope are thinking, our state should do that. So I'm hoping that you will do something to get your state to do that. So what I'm looking for from the panel is if somebody here wants to say, oh, I'd like my state to do what Washington or Colorado did, how do you do that? What do you do as a citizen to make that happen?
I would say maybe you start with your governor or your Office of Economic Development and International Trade, or maybe a state legislator. I mean, we love to run bills, right, and looking for ideas. So you might take that up to your state legislator and suggest this and talk about the impact that Colorado and Washington and other places have had and why that would be beneficial to your state. But it's a really great, like I said, a great bipartisan bill, and it does impact and improve the outlook for workers. Generational wealth is built. There's so many, many benefits, and I don't think you can go wrong by doing this. And there's many, many companies. We did looked at some data. A lot of owners are going to be selling off their companies within the next 10 years. A lot of them are in their senior years, and they don't know what they're going to do. Are they passing it on to an employee, maybe employee base? That would probably be a great thing. Or are they selling it off to a private individual? Or if they want it to be a going concern and continue, they might want to do that. So I think, more states need to really look into this policy because it could change the lives of so many people there in their states.
Yeah, that's great advice Representative Ricks gave. I think the other thing you might want to do if you're interested in more than one state, and some of these ESOPs, of course, operate way more than one state, is work through some of the national legislative organizations or the National Governors Conference. But for the legislators, there's NCSL, the Council of State Government, ALEC, and I'm sure others that have task forces to get all the legislators together at their annual meetings, and it would be a good opportunity there to push the whole concept of ESOPs and employee ownership.
Or your state chamber of commerce. A lot of state chamber, they're affecting legislation all the time, and so if you don't have employee ownership programming within your state, I would go to the state chamber of commerce and see. I think that's an easy place. They're connected, they understand, they're usually impacting legislation, they have the contacts. That's an easy place for an average citizen to be able to start.
Hey, so my question's actually for you, Zachary. I come from comms. I'm the hack at my company. I owe one of your colleagues a response today, actually. And my question's a little bit about the newsroom and how it thinks about these sorts of stories. We've heard a lot about how, awareness is really important. And one thing that I stumble upon is that sometimes, these stories seem maybe worthy but dull. They're wonderful stories, but are they really news? So I'd love to hear a little bit from you about how you and your colleagues think about the newsworthiness of employee ownership stories in the States these days.
Yeah, for Politico in particular, we have a kind of a niche, right? It's covering policy and politics, so we're really focused on, what policy ideas are percolating, who's lobbying behind that, kind of what's the debate, what's the tension, what's the outlook, but we also do try to talk to the business leaders and people on the ground to learn what it all means. So I think from a Politico perspective, and we not only cover Washington, but we have people in states across the country, including Florida and California and New York and some others. And so we kind of have multiple layers. And so if you're asking, how do you get coverage, or what is the pitch like? It's kind of like identifying like who is the reporter on that beat. And with this, it could be someone who's covering a state house or is covering tax policy or financial policy. But then there's like a whole ecosystem of media outlets. I think of like local business journals, for example, who I used to work for one of those in Austin, and we're in that case, you're always looking for like, what is a great profile of a business or a story like that. So hopefully I answered your question, but that's kind of the landscape. Yeah.
Thank you for this session. It's been very interesting. My name's Chris Mack, and I actually ran a center like this in Massachusetts some years ago. And I'm curious about whether it's Steve Storkin, who's been mentioned, should have some thoughts about this. A stretch goal might be to look at how states can use their procurement purchasing power to support employee ownership. And it's wonderful to hear this kind of state government level interest. It would be great to get states to actually put their money where their mouth is on this. There's issues about wanting to protect the women-owned and minority-owned and different kinds of special categories that exist right now. But is that something that is of interest to you, and should we talk about it at the break?
I know that in our state, we work closely with our governor's office. Governor Reynolds and her Lieutenant Governor Adam Gregg had launched an initiative called the Empowering Rural Iowa Initiative. And they approached us, in addition to helping with this space with employee ownership, to help them think through what kinds of legislation, what kinds of policy do they need to put in place going forward. I'd not heard that one before, and I think it's excellent. Although I will say that some of the federal set-aside programs that are out there that sound better than in reality, don't want to take a mean swipe, but that is an interesting way to try to your point, put your money where your mouth is. Can I say one other thing here real quick? Yes, about federal agencies. We need to get the Small Business Development, or I'm sorry, the Small Business Administration to open up and consider co-ops for funding, because they will not and do not, and I'm sure they have good reasons, but unfortunately, when we talk about de-risking, if we don't have their backing behind it, it makes it difficult for some of these loans to go through. And then the Economic Development Administration also can play a significant role. They frequently will fund some of the revolving loan programs, but if we got more capital into those programs, then the sky's the limit.
So you're saying co-ops can't get 7A loans? Is that what you mean? Or?
Correct. They're excluded.
I would just like, so I've thought about this a lot. I think that including employee-owned businesses, the same as minority-owned or women-owned business should absolutely be considered. I know it's complicated. I think it's something that can happen at the federal level. But the DoD has a pilot program for employee-owned companies right now, and it's really clunky, and they didn't go far enough, so it's hard to actually utilize it. But I think they're being really innovative in some of the things that they're trying to do to bring employee ownership into DoD contracts. So there's lots of information out there. You can go read about what the DoD is doing. If there's businesses in your state who work with the DoD, who are employee-owned, you should make sure that they understand this program. But we're trying to utilize it. It's not easy. It definitely wasn't done right. They clearly didn't talk to anybody who runs an ESOP on how this actually works. But so hopefully we can influence that. But there are some things programs out there that are looking at how you can use the federal procurement process to look at employee ownership. So I think it should be explored, certainly at the federal level. I know it would be really complicated to do, but what isn't in government?